This magical book will tell us. That was like miles away. I don't know, but the last name's Cohen. Boker Tov, Chodesh Tov. Good morning. We're going to get started. Today's service is going to be long, so stick with us if you can. We'll be learning a little Talmud at the end, but that'll probably be in more than an hour. So, got to get started. We're going to start on page 6 with Birchot HaShachar, blessings for a brand new day. We ask that if you're able, you please rise. Page 6. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher natan l'sechvi bein halachim bein yom ubein layla. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher sani v'atzam ho. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam she'asani Yisrael. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam she'asani ben chorin. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam hokeach ivrim. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam malbish arumim. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam matir asurim. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam zokef kefufim. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam rukah haaretz al hamayim. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam she'asali kol tzarki. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam amechin mitzadei gaver. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam mozer shabifura. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam mozer shabetifara. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam manoten liya'if koach. Baruch atah Adonai. Otneinu hayom v'choyim lechanu chassid arachamim beinech v'nei choreinu v'tigmalinu chassidim tovim. Baruch atah Adonai gomel chassidim tovim le'amo Yisrael. You may be seated, page 7. Yehi ratzon milfanech Adonai Elohim. Ashreinu matov chalkeinu manayim garleinu meyafa Yerushateinu. Ashreinu shanachnu mashkimim arivim erev havokev ve'omrim pamayim bechol yom. Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai echad. Atah l'tzanoni ben. Kadesh shimcha makdishei shemecha vekadesh shimcha bo'olemecha v'yishuat atarim v'tagvi akarneinu. Baruch atah Adonai mekadesh shimcha b'rabim atahu Adonai Eloheinu b'shamayim ha'aretz. Tasita. Maseiman. Beshuvit shvutechem lenechem amar Adonai. Choose a rabbinic text to study between pages 9 and 12. Rav Chisda v'Rabba bar Rav Huna havu yatvei b'dina kulei yoma. Yom echad. Page 12. Yehi ratzot milfanech Adonai Eloheinu v'lo yavoteinu shetiten chalkeinu b'toratecha b'nei mitamid Sharon HaKohen. Ohev shalom rodef shalom ohev et abriot m'korban Torah. If we wait just a moment, I think he's admitting one more. And yes, perfect. All right. Kaddish Rabbanan, please rise. Page 13. Yitzkadav Yitzkadash Shemei Rabbah. Ve'olamad Yivra Kiratei Ve'olamich Malchutei. V'chayechon Uv'yom Echon Uv'chayed Uv'ol Beit Yisrael. V'agala Uv'izman V'yiru Amen. Yehi Shmei Rabbah Mevarach Le'olam Olam Le'omayah. Yitbarach V'yishtabach V'yitpa'ar V'yitramham V'yitnaseh V'yitadai V'yitaleh V'yitalal Shmei D'Kodesha B'richu Le'ela Mikol B'yirchata V'shirata Tushbechata V'nechemata Tamiran Ve'alma V'yimeru Amen. All Yisrael Ve'al Rabbanan Ve'al Talmidehom Ve'al Kol Talmidehom Ve'al Kol Ma'an De'askin Be'oraita Di Be'atra Dein V'di B'chol Atar Ve'atar Yehi L'chon L'chon Shlama Rabba China V'chista V'rachamim V'chayin Arichin M'zona Revicha U'forkana Min Kadama V'hon V'ishmaya V'yimeru Amen. Yehi Slama Rabba Min Shmaya Chaim Tovim Aleinu Ve'al Kol Yisrael V'yimeru Amen. Oseh Shalom B'mramav U'rachmav Yaseh Shalom Aleinu Ve'al Kol Yisrael V'yimeru Amen. You may be seated, page 14, Psalm 30. Please more shir Chanukah David David Anu Mimcha. Merev Yadim Lechu Edacha Shma. Afachthani spedile v'acholi b'taktas akiveta zenisim echra lemanis d'merchach v'belo yidom Adonai Elohai le'olam odeka. Warner's Kaddish, page 15. Yitzkadav Yitzkadash Shmei Rabbah. Ve'alama tivra kirtei ve'amlicha futei. V'chaychon v'yomechon v'chayed v'chol Meit Yisrael. V'agala u'bizman karhi v'imiru amen. Yehi shmei rabha v'harach ve'alam l'amei al-maya. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitma'ar v'yitramam v'yinaseh. V'yitadar v'yitaleh v'yitalal shmei d'kodesha b'rekbo. La'ela v'kol birchata v'shirata. Tushbechata v'nechmata. Damiran ve'alma v'yimiru amen. Yehi shlama rabba v'yishmaya. V'chaim aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'yimiru amen. Oseh shalom b'brama. Yaseh shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'yimiru amen. Please rise for Baruch Shamar, page 16. Baruch Shamar ve'yaolam baruch. Yachit chayolam melech meshubach mored shema gadol baruch atah Adonai melech mehulal batishbachod. You may be seated, page 17. Hadol Adonai kiru mishmod. Ki kol Elohim himelitim Adonai Shemai Masad ve'adar lefanav Sumincha v'lefanav Yiram Yad Tzinu Ramim Ramim hu Adonai Eloheinu v'yishtachavu lahar kodsho ki kadosh Adonai Eloheinu v'hurach v'mechaper avon. Page 19. Adonai tzvot asher namatech v'ach Adonai Oshia melech yaneinu ve'yim koreinu Oshia et amnecha v'chanach v'techa v'nasim Adonai. Bani bechasdecha v'tachti ageli v'vishutecha shel Adonai ki gamal alai mizmor etodar yonai kol haaretz. U'shemo ki tov Adonai le'elam chasdo v'edovator emunato yicham v'Adonai le'elam yismach. Middle of page 20. Adonai l'shamayim. Tamba machshava. Ki ekol l'chayim. Ve'hurach v'mechaper v'lo yashchit ve'bal shiva v'lo yerkol chamato Adonai Oshia melech yaneinu ve'yom koreinu. Page 21. Ashrei 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 Beitecha Hodilu Chased Hashem Shekach Hashem Shalom Tevid Aramecha Oyem Alecha Kol Shekach Alecha Kol Shekach Alecha Zechon Eachit yadech It's on your message. Shemer Tehilat Adonai Rapir Pi B'Barach Kavasar Shem Kol Sholem Ba'er V'anach Mevarch Yamet Aved Olam Hallelujah Hallelujah Hallelujah. Adonai shomer et kerhim yatzal me'amanad yeded v'derech v'shem yavet yimloch l'nai le'olam elahai ch'tzion l'dor v'ado hallelujah hallelujah ki tav l'Eloheinu ki na'im l'Eloheinu. Shabbat Yerushalayim. Yizlamar Hayim Magid Yaakov Chukav Mishpatav Yisrael Asachem L'chol Goyim Mishpatim B'Eirahum Hallelujah Hallelujah Hallelujah. Page 24. Malchus. Vayarhem Karen Le'amot Ilalecho Chasidav Dim Yisraelim Karovo Hallelujah Hallelujah Shir Adonai Shir Chadash page 25 Chasidim Yeah Kirtzei Ramin Hota Begronim V'chem Leisor Malchechem Zikim Nechbedechem Mechav Levar Zela Sod B'mishpat Katuv Hadar Lecho Chasidav Hallelujah 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 Take a shofar Hallelujah Hallelujah B'tziltzal Shama Hallelujah Hallelujah B'tziltzal Truah Kodesh Hamate Hallelujah 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 Kodesh Hamate Hallelujah 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 Baruch Adonai Baruch Adonai Elohim Melech Yisrael Sinifat Levato Baruch Shem Kvodo Le'elam V'mechol et Kol Haaretz Amen Amen. Please rise, page 26. Vayvarech David et Adonai. Then he calls him Vayom David. Baruch Adonai. Oh, Elohim. Atah Adonai. Asher Alechem. Atah Adonai Elohim Asher B'charta B'Avraham V'yatzitu Mar Kasdim V'sat B'shmo V'raham Matzat L'Bavonim Anefanecha V'charatu
Lord, humbly take utterance.
V'ayam B'kata Lifnei B'aviv V'tochiyam B'yavasha V'edrodfei Mishlach Nitzot K'mo Heaven B'mayim Ozim V'yosha Adonai B'yom page 27. Vayar Yisrael et Hayat HaGdolah Asher Asanai Mitzrayim Vayirham et Adonai Vayimir B'Adonai Moshe Avdo Az Yashir Moshe B'nei Yisrael. 3 lines down. Ozi Ve'zimarat Yah Vayehi V'Yeshua Ozi Zimarat Yah Vayehi Yeshua Ozi Zimarat Yah Vayehi Yeshua Ozi Zimarat Yah Vayehi Yeshua Selim Yaveh Lord give up Yeshlach Mechaneh Yisroken Michamach Asim Natin Hayicha Achitam Ochechem Elimoav Yachazim Nahim Adonai Himla Le'olam Va'ed Adonai Himla Le'olam Va'ed Adonai Hamlucha Moshe B'Goyim V'alu Moshe Bartzin L'Shpadet Harisav V'aytal Adonai Hamlucha V'yadonai L'melech Kol Haaretz V'yomahu Adonai Echad U'Shemo Echad page 29 Yishtabach Shemecha Le'ad Malakeinu Ahel HaMelech Naz Memshadah ברכות ולהוד מעצב עולם, ברוך אתה אדוני המלך הגדול בתשבחות, אל העלאות הנפלאות, המלכה בשירי זמרה, מלך מלכי העולמים, יתגדל ויתקדש שמי רבה, אל הדברה קירותי במלך מלכותי, בחיי חונו ומחונו בחיי לכל בית ישראל, בגלה בזמן קריב במהרו אמן, יהי שמי רבה מברך לעולם עולמי עולמי, יתברך וישתבח ויתפאר ויתרומם ויתנשא, ויתעטר ויתעלה ויתעלה שמי לקודשה בריחו, לעילא מן כל ברכתה ושירתה, תושבחתה ונחמתה, דמירן בעמך במהרו אמן. ברכו את אדוני המבורך,
ברוך אדוני המבורך,
ברוך אדוני המבורך לעולם ועד, ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם, יוצר אור ובורא חושך עושה שלום וברא את הכל. You may be seated. We're 5 lines down on page 30. Hamir lies v'adori malecha. Habaruch. Zehlat itbach tzorcheinu makin v'kohanim. כולם אוהבים, כולם ברורים, כולם גיבורים וכולם עושים בהם אוויר רצון קונם, וכולם פותחים אבים בקדושה וטהרה, בשירה ובזמרה ומברכים משבחים, ומפארים ומעריצים, מקדישים וממליכים, את שם האל המלך הגדול והנורא הקדוש הוא. וכולם מקבלים עליכם במלכות שמיים זה מזה, ונותנים רשות זה לזה, להקדיש יוצם בנחת רוח, בשפה בנמת קדושה, כולם כאחד עונים ואומרים ביראה, קדוש, 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 אדוני צבאות, ברוך הוא לארץ כבודו. ולפנים וחיות הקודש, ברעש גדול מנסים ולמצרפים, לעומתם משבחים ואומרים, ברוך כבוד אדוני אור חדש הציון תאיר ונזכה כולנו מהר על הערו, אור חדש הציון תאיר ונזכה כולנו מהר על הערו, ברוך אתה אדוני יוצא מהרות ורבותינו. Page 32. כי בשם קודשך ואבינו לשלום יבא כנפות הארץ ותוליכנו כממית לארצנו כי על פה ישועות אתה ובנו בחרתם מכל עם בלשון וקרבתנו לשמך הגדול סלע באמת להודות לך את באהבה ברוך אתה אדוני יבוכה בעמו ישראל באהבה שמע ישראל אדוני אלוהינו אדוני אחד ואהבת את אדוני אלוהיך בכל לבבך ובכל נפשך ובכל מעשיך והיו הדברים האלה אשר אנוכי מצווך היום על לבביך ושיננתם לבניך ודיברת בם ושבתך בביתך ובלכתך בדרך ובשוכבך ובקומך וקשרתם להות על ידיך והיו לטודפות בין עיניך וכתבתם המזוזות ביתך וישעריך היה משמעת ששמע שלך מצוותכם מלאכתכם ויזכור נשמע את השמיים צומתם המזוזות אלוהיכם אשר יצאתם מארץ מצרים מיד אדוני אלוהיכם ממהר ויצאתם כיום בשם אמת ודור קיים ושמו קיים וכניסה נחל מלכותו ממנת תולד קיים עדות ורחיים וקיימים נאמנים ישראל דרך הראשונים אמת שתו אדוני אלוהינו ודאי אבותינו מלכנו מלך אבותינו גואלנו גואל אבותינו יוצרנו צור ישועתנו פדינו מצילנו מעלם שמך אין אלוהים זולתך עזרת אבותינו את המלך page 35 משיח חכם בכל דבר ראשון אין לנו מלך גאול משיח זאת שמחורים גדול מן העולם משפיע תהילת העליון ברוך ומברך משה בני ישראל לכנו שירה בשמחה רבה ואמרו כולם מי כמוך באים אדוני מי כמוך נדר בקודש נורא תהילות אוסף אלך שירה חדשה שמחוגלים נשמך שפת הים יחד כולם הודו והמליכו ואמירו Adonai Himloch Le'olam Vahen. Please rise. Tzor Yisrael, Kom HaBe'ezrat Yisrael, Ufdechnu Mecha Yehuda Ve'Yisrael, Kohaneinu Adonai Tzvaot Shemo, Kedosh Yisrael, Baruch Atah Adonai, Gal Yisrael. We'll begin the Amidah together on page 36b. We'll continue through the Kedusha on 37 and go silently the rest of the way through. Because it's Rosh Chodesh, remember to add the Ya'aleh V'Yavo paragraph that's found in the middle of page 41, I believe. 41, in the middle of page 41, where it says on Rosh Chodesh, add there when you're in your silent Amidah. But again, we'll start together on page 36b. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu Elohei Avotenu Elohei Abraham Elohei Yitzchak Elohei Yaakov Elohei Sarah Elohei Rivka Elohei Rachav Elohei Leah Ha'el HaGadol HaGibor VeHanor Ha'el Elyon Gomel Chasadim Tovim Vekonei Yaakov Vezocher Chasdei Avot Umevi Gohel Livnei Bneihem Leman Shemo B'Ahava Melech Choser Foked Moshiach Magen Baruch Atah Adonai Magen Abraham Foked Sarah Atah Gibor Le'olam Adonai Mechayim Itim Atah Rav L'Shia Morin Atah Mechalkel Chayim Bechesed Mechayim Itim Rachamim Rabim Somech Noflim Verofech Olim Matir Asurim Mekayim Emunatol Lishenei Achar Yichamocha Bal Geborot Umitam Elach מלך ממית מחיה ומצמיח ישועה ונאמן אתה לחיות מתים ברוך אתה אדוני לחיי המתים נקדש את שמך בעולם כשם שמקדישים אותו בשמי מרום ככתוב ידויך וכרזל זה ויאמר
קדוש 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 אדוני צבאות מלוך הארץ כבודו
קדוש 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 אדוני צבאות מלוך הארץ כבודו לאומתם ברוך יאמרו
ברוך כבוד אדוני
Baruch Yevod Adonai B'Mkomov Divrei Kodshech Katuv Lemor
Yimloch Adonai v'Yolam L'Hai Tzion L'Dor Hallelujah
Yimloch Adonai L'Olam L'Hai Tzion L'Dor V'Dor Hallelujah L'Dor V'Dor Nagid Godecha Netzach Netzachim Kedushatcha Nakdish V'Shivchacha Eloheinu Mipin Lo Yamush Le'olam Ma'ed Ki HaMelech Kadosh V'Kadosh Ata Baruch Ata Adonai Ha'el HaKadosh If you're still praying the Amidah, feel free to continue. Otherwise, because of Rosh Chodesh, we turn to page 50 and rise for our short Hallel. Page 50. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kirishanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu likro et ha'halel. Hallelujah. Mikim me'afada me'ashpot yarim hevion le'hoshivim nedivim im nedivei amo moshivi akeret habayit em habanim smecha. Hallelujah. Page 51. Betzeit Yisrael mi'mitzrayim bet Yaakov me'em lohes hayta Yehuda lekosho Yisrael mamshelotav hayam rav hayanos hayarden yisov lehafor leharim rakducherim Yevahot kivnei tzon malech hayam kitanus hayarden yisov lehachor leharim tikiduchevim Yevahot kivnei tzon Milifnei Adon Choli haaretz Milifnei Elohai Yaakov Ahofei Atzor Agamayim Alhamish Le'mayin Hamayim. Page 52. Adonai Zecharanu Yevarech Yevarech et Beit Yisrael Yevarech et Beit Aharon Yevarech Yirei Adonai Hakitanim im Hagedolim Yosef Adonai Alechem Alechem ve'avnechem Beruchim atem Adonai Oseh shamayim va'aretz Shemayim Ladonai, Va'aretz natan livnei Adam, La'metim Hallelujah, Ve'lo kol yodei Tuhuma, Va'nachnu nevarech Yah, Ve'ata ve'ad olam, Ve'ata ve'ad olam, Hallelujah. Page 53. Mashiach Adonai. Lecha esbach zevach todav Shem Adonai ekra. Nedarai l'Adonai ashalem negnana lechol amo. Bechatzrot Beit Adonai betochechi Yerushalayim. Hallelujah. Middle of page 53. Hallelujah, Adonai, kol goyim shabcho, kol ha'omim, gigavar aleinu, chasdov emet, Adonai, eonam hallelujah, hodu l'Adonai, ki le'olam, ki le'olam, Yomana Yisrael ki le'olam chasto Yomruna Beit Aaron ki le'olam chasto Yomruna Yirei Adonai ki le'olam chasto. Page 54. Mina Meitza Karatia. Tov l'chasod v'Adonai. The box on page 54. Pitcholi Sha'arei Tzedek Avov Amodeha Pitcholi Sha'arei Tzedek Avov Amodeha Shal Adonai Tzadikim Yavovo Zeh Shal Adonai Tzadikim Yavovo Odecha Ki Anitani Ki anitani v'atehili lishoa even maso havodim hayta lerosh pina even maso havodim hayta lerosh pina meit Adonai hayta zot hinifla v'einenu meit Adonai hayta zot hinifla v'einenu zeh hayom asa Adonai nagila v'nismecha bo zeh hayom asa Adonai nagila v'nismecha bo. Page 55. Adonai Hoshiana.
Adonai Hoshiana.
Adonai Hoshiana.
Adonai Hoshiana.
Adonai Hatzlichana.
Adonai Hatzliachna.
Adonai Hatzlichana.
Adonai Hatzliachna.
Baruch haba b'shem Adonai, berachnuchem mibeit Adonai. Baruch haba b'shem Adonai, berachnuchem mibeit Adonai. El Adonai v'ya'elanu, Yisrocha gavotim atkanot hamizbeach. El Adonai v'ya'elanu, Yisrocha gavotim atkanot hamizbeach. Eli ata ve'odeka, Elohai hadomemeka. Eli ata ve'odeka, Elohai hadomemeka. Hodel Adonai ki tov, ki le'olam chasdo. Hodel Adonai ki tov, ki le'olam chasdo. Yadloch Adonai Eloheinu, brin ha'im. Yelecha tov le'atod u'shimcha na'el ezamer, ki me'olam ad olam atahel. Baruch atah Adonai melech mehodal b'tishbachot. We turn one page to page 56 for Kaddish, for Chatzi Kaddish, Kaddish Shalem, page 56. Itzkata v'itzkata shemei rabba, v'hamati v'rakirutei v'yamlich malchutei, v'chayechona v'methchona v'chayei l'chol beit Yisrael, v'agala v'zman karhi v'meru, amen. Yehi shmei rabba mevarach, le'alham olamei homayha, Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitvar v'yitramam v'yitnaseh v'yitadat v'yitaleh v'yitalav shmei l'kulisha b'reichu le'elam in kol birchata v'shirata tushbechata v'nechmata damiran be'alma v'yimeru amen Yitkabat tzlaton v'oton d'chol Yisrael kadam avoni v'shmaya v'yimeru amen Yehi shlam rabba min shmaya v'chayim aleni v'akol Yisrael v'yimeru amen Ohosei shalom b'mromav Oyaseh shalom aleni v'akol Yisrael v'yimeru amen. We turn now to page 65 as we'll sing the third and fourth lines on page 65, the first paragraph, Ki mitzion teitzei Torah. Ki mitzion teitzei Torah. Ki mitzion teitzei Torah. Urefar Adonai Yerushalayim Baruch Shenatan Torah Torah Baruch Shenatan Torah Torah Le'amo Yisrael B'kedushato. You may be seated if you're standing. Our reading today is a special reading for Rosh Chodesh, found in the back of the book on page 320. It's going to be Numbers, chapter 28, verses 1 through 15, split over 4 separate sections. We'll be reading the first one first, page 320. וידבר אדוני אל משה לאמור צו את בני ישראל ואמרת עליהם את קורבני לחמי לישי ריח ניחוחי תשמרו להקריב לי במועדו ואמרת להם זה האיש אשר תקריבו לאדוני כבשים בני שנה תמימים, שניים ליום או לתמיד. Our second reading is the second paragraph. It's Numbers 28, verses 3 through 5. ואמרת להם זה האיש אשר תקריבו לאדוני כבשים בני שנה תמימים, שניים ליום או לתמיד. את הכבש אחד תעשה בבוקר, ואת הכבש השני תעשה בין 40, ועשירית תפס סולת למנחה, לולב ושמן כתית רביעית ההין. Our third reading starts verse 6 and ends verse 10, chapter 28 of Numbers, the third paragraph on page 320. Ola tamid hasuya behar Sinai l'reach nichoach nishel Adonai v'niskor b'hitahin l'keves ha'echad v'kodesh ha'sech nesech shechar l'Adonai v'et ha'keves ha'sheni ta'aseh ben arba'im כמנחת הבוקר וכניסקו תעשה אישר ריח ניחוח לאדוני וביום השבת שני כבשים בני שנה תמימים ושני עשרונים צולת מנחה בלולה והשמן וניסקו עולת שבת בשבתו על עולת התמיד וניסקה. And the final reading is found at the bottom of the page 320. It's chapter 28 of Numbers, verses 11 through 15. ובראשי חודשיכם תקריבו על האדוני פרים בני בקר שניים וילד אחד כבשים בני שנה שבעה תמימים ושלושה עשרונים סולת מנחה בלולה והשמן לפר האחד ושני עשרונים סולת מנחה בלולה והשמן לאיל האחד Visaron, 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 Solet mincha blula, Hashem in the keves ha'echad, Ola reach nichoach ishel Adonai, V'niskehem chatzi ha'hin, Yihel ha'par u'shlishit ha'hin la'il, ורביעית ההין לכבש יין זאת עולת חודש בחודשו לחודשי השנה ושעיר עזים אחד לחטאת לאדוני על עולת התמיד יעשה ונזכור. All right, we'll turn back now. Skip that. Okay, we'll turn back to page 77, as we'll be singing Etz Chaim Hi in the symbolic way of putting away our Torah for this brief Torah-esque service we just did. Page 77. Etz Chaim Hi v'machazikim ba v'tom cheya me'ushar דרכיה דרכי נועם וכל נתיבותיה שלום השיבנו אדוני אליך ונשובה חדש ימינו חדש ימינו כקדם. You may be seated if you're standing. Ashrei is found on page 78. Ashrei Ashrei Adon Tov Malchut Einech פותח את ידיך צדיק
פתח את ידיך ומשביע כוחך הרצון שהבאת עמה בכל דבר.
תהילת הלילה פרפידי דרכו בשר שם קודש הליל המועד ואנחנו נברך ימת אבד עולם הללויה page 80 ובעל הציון גודל שבך שבר כובנו מנלנאי ואתה קדוש שבטי ישראל וקרזל זה ואמר קדוש 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 אדוני צבאות מלך הארץ כבודו קדיש קדיש ותישא עיני רוח ואש מאחורי קורש גדול ברוך כבוד אדוני ממקומו ולני רוח ורשים את בצ'ו אדוני מלך אנחנו והורך המחרים מאחוריך תיכנס ויפתח בך ידי שמך, כי לא עזבת ראשך אדוני, אלא נחפץ למען צדקו, יגדיל תורה והדיר. At this point, if you're wearing tefillin, we remove them briefly. As soon as we're done with this, we'll turn to page 103, I think, for Chatzi Kaddish, and then we'll have our quick Musaf service for Rosh Chodesh. So I'm just going to take off my tefillin real quick. You should do the same if you're wearing tefillin at this time. If you're not, just give us 1 sec. I'll be right back, and we'll continue with the end of our service. Be right back. All right, so while you're taking them off, I'll just give you a heads up. Here's where we'll be going so that you don't make an error, hopefully, or at least we can try our best. So we'll be on page 103 in just a moment, where we'll be doing a Hatzi Kaddish before our Musaf service. Musaf for Rosh Chodesh, they mix the pages here. You'll see it says Musaf Amidah for Rosh Chodesh and Chol HaMoed. It's not Chol HaMoed, it's Rosh Chodesh, which means since we'll be joining together on 104, we'll do 104b together. We'll do 105 Kedusha together. We'll just turn pages, 103, 104, 105. But then it'll go silently. At that point, after 105, when it goes silently, you'll follow the signpost that says on Rosh Chodesh, continue on page 106. So just turn to the next page, do all the things, follow 106, 107, 108, and then the Amidah ends on 109. Don't continue to 110. That's for Chol HaMoed. And then, of course, we'll flip back to 82. We'll do Kaddish Shalem. We'll count the Omer. We'll do Aleinu. We'll do Kaddishes, and then we'll be done. And we appreciate y'all bearing with us through all this. So anyhow, hopefully that gave you time to get off your tefillin. We ask that you rise, page 103, for Chatzi Kaddish, for our Musaf service. Yitzkadal v'yitzkadash shemei rabba v'hamad yivrak kirutei v'yamlich malchutei v'chayechon v'yimechon v'chayerechon b'et Yisrael b'agala v'zman karhiv v'miru amen yehesh rabba mevarach le'olam l'me'omayha Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitbar v'yitramam v'yitnaseh v'yitadat v'yitaleh v'yitalal shmei kudusha b'richo le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata Tushbechata v'nechmata damiran be'ama v'miru amen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu v'Elohei Avotenu Elohei Abraham Elohei Yitzchak Elohei Yaakov Elohei Sarah Elohei Rivka Elohei Rachel Elohei Leah Ha'el HaGadol HaGibor v'Hanor Ha'el Elyon Gomel Chasadim Tovim v'Konei Hakol v'Zocher Chasdei Avot u'Mevii Gohel Livnei B'neihem L'man Shemo B'Ahava Melech Ozer Foked u'Moshiach Magen Baruch atah Adonai Magen Abraham Foked Sarah אתה גיבור לעם אדוני מחיים איתים אתה רב להושיע מוריד אתה לכלכל חיים בחסד מחיים איתים ברחמים רבים סומך נופלים ברופא חולים ומתיר אסורים ומחיים אמרתו לשני אחר מחמוך בגבורות ומתמלך מלך נמית מחייל מצמיח ישועה ונאמן אתה לחיות מתים ברוך אתה אדוני לחיי המתים נקדש את שמך בעולם כשם שמקדישים אותו בשמי מרום ככתוב היד ביך וקרא זה ויאמר
Kadosh, 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 Adonai Tzevaot, Melech haaretz kevodo.
Kadosh, 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 Adonai Tzevaot, Melech haaretz kevodo, Le'umatam Baruch Yomeru.
Baruch kivod Adonai mimkomo.
Baruch kivod Adonai mimkomo, Divrei Kodesh katuv le'mor.
Yimloch Adonai le'olam, Ha'yitzin yom ador v'ador, Hallelujah.
Yimloch Adonai le'olam, Elohei Chtzion, L'dor v'ador, Hallelujah. L'dor v'ador nagid godecha, Netzach netzachim, Kedushatcha nakdish, V'shivchacha Eloheinu mipinu lo yamush le'olam v'ed, Ki HaMelech Gadol v'Kadosh ata, Baruch ata Adonai, Ha'el HaKadosh. Rosh Chodeshim. If you're still praying the Amidah, feel free to continue. Otherwise, we turn back to page 82 for Kaddish Shalom. Yitzkadah litzkadah shemei rabah beham hativ rakirutei b'yamlech malchutei b'chayechonu v'mechonu b'chayei l'chol beit Yisrael v'agalav b'zman kartiv v'meruhu amen yehesh mei rabah mevarach le'olam olam me'amayha Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitbar v'yitramam v'yitnaseh v'yitadah v'yitaleh v'yitalal shmei kodesha aberichu le'elamin kol birchata v'shirata tushmechata v'nechmata damiran me'ama v'yimeruhu amen Titka batzla tanavaton dechla Yisrael kadam v'ondi v'shmaya v'yimeruhu amen Yehesh lama rabba min shmaya v'chaim aleinu v'akol Yisrael v'yimeruhu amen Ohosei shalom Brahma, Hoyase Shalom, Aleinu Ve'alkol Yisrael, V'yimeru, Amen. We'll turn to page 152, as we'll be counting the Omer from last night, in case you missed it. We're here to help you out. So turn to page 152, we'll read the I am ready to fulfill the mitzvah paragraph, we'll read the blessing below that, then we'll turn to page 156, as we'll be counting the day that comes after 44. So the day that comes after 44 is the day that we will be counting today. Again, we're back on page 152. I am ready to fulfill the mitzvah of counting the Omer as it is ordained in the Torah. You shall count from the eve of the second day of Pesach, when an Omer of grain is to be brought as an offering. 7 complete weeks. The day after the 7th week of your counting will make 50 days. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kishanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu al sfirat ha'omer. We turn to 156 and we count. Hayom chamisha ve'arba'im yom shehem shisha shavuot u'shlosha yamim la'omer. Today is the 45th day of the Omer. That's 6 weeks and 3 days of the Omer. May it hold blessing for all of us. Amen. We turn back to page 83 for Aleinu. Aleinu leshabeach b'adon hakol, לתת גדולה ליוצא בראשית, שלא עשנו כגויי הרצון, ולא שמנו כמשפחות אדמה, ולא שם חלקנו כהם, וגור עלינו ככל המונם, אנחנו קוראים ומשתחווים ובוכים, לפני מלך מלכי המלכים הקדוש ברוך הוא ככתוב בתורתך, אדוני ימלוך לעולם ועד, ונאמר, והיה אדוני למלך על כל הארץ, ביום ההוא יהיה אדוני אחד, ושמו אחד, ושמו echad. Mourner's Kaddish, page 84. Yitzkatav, Yitzkatash, Merhaba, Ve'alamat, Yivrak, Yiruteh, Ve'amalech Malchuteh, V'chayechon, V'yom echad, V'chayed, V'chol Beit Yisrael, V'gala, U'bizman Kariv, V'miru, Amen. Yehi Shmei Rabba, V'varach, Le'olam, Elomei Almaya. Yitvarach, V'yishtabach, V'yitzpa'ar, V'yitzromham, V'yitnaseh. V'yitadar, V'yitaleh, V'yitalal, Shmei D'Kudeshah, Brikhu. La'ela, Mikol, Birchata, V'shirata, Tushbechata, V'nechemata, D'amiran, Be'alma, V'yimiru, Amen. Yehi Shlama Rabba Min Shmaya, V'chaim Aleinu Ve'al Kol Yisrael, V'yimiru, Amen. Oseh Shalom B'mrama, Huyaseh Shalom, Aleinu Ve'al Kol Yisrael, V'yimiru, Amen. You may be seated if you're standing and would like to. The Psalm for Wednesday is found on page 87. Hayom Yom Revi'i V'Shabbat, Shebol Revi'im Nihita Shalom. Yabi Yom Chol. Yaakov Bina Barim. V'chon hanen al Adonai nari al etzori sheheinu nekad mafana b'toda bizmiro nari alo ki el gadol Adonai u'melech gadol al kol Elohim. Psalm for Rosh Chodesh, page 90, bottom of the page. Baruchi nafshi et Adonai, Adonai Elohai gadol tameod. Uchot, shanti v'yosef. Bal yeshuvu nechasod haaretz. That's good. Chasida. Marabinasa. Kolam elecha. Echa baronai. Ye'er ha'abalav sichi anochi esmach baronai yitam huchatayim min ha'aretz rishim odeinam baruchi nafshi et Adonai, hallelujah. We continue to send our condolences to the family during the Shiva period of Lisa Starr Rosenstein, as well as the family during the Shloshim period of Ronald Joseph Ronnie Ratcliffe. We also remember the Yortzites this morning, Wednesday, May 12th, of Harry David Abelow, Robert Jonas, and Michael Wernick. And if you have additional names to add, feel free to do so at this time. Final Mourner's Kaddish is found back on page 84. Yitzgadal, Yitzgadash, Shmei Rabba. Ve'alamat Yivrak, Yiruteh, Ve'amalech Malchuteh. V'chayechon, V'yom echad, V'chayed, V'chol Beit Yisrael. V'gala, U'bizman Kariv, V'yimiru, Amen. Yehi Shmei Rabba, Mevarach, Le'olam Elomei Almaya. Yitbarach, V'yishtabach, V'yitpa'ar, V'yitromam, V'yitnaseh. V'yitadar, V'yitaleh, V'yitalal, Shmei D'Kudeshah, Brikhu. La'ela min kol birchata v'shirata, tushbechata v'nechemata, ta'amiran v'alma v'yimiru, amen. Yehi Shlama Rabba Mim Shmaya. Chaim Aleinu Ve'al Kol Yisrael V'yimeru. Amen. Osei Shalom Bimrama. Hu Yaseh Shalom. Aleinu Ve'al Kol Yisrael V'yimeru. Amen. Boker Tov, everybody. Good morning. Chodesh Tov. Happy Rosh Chodesh to all y'all. I'm going to be here. We're going to be learning. If you want to stick around, you're welcome to. We're going to be learning a little Talmud. It'll be pretty quick today because I knew it was Rosh Chodesh. If not, no problem. We appreciate you helping us make a minyan, all y'all. So thank you for that. We're wishing you a beautiful, wonderful day and a great start to the month of Sivan. And of course, we'll be here tomorrow morning for regular services. I'm going to drop my talis right there, and then we'll learn a little if you want to stick around. If not, either way, Boker Tov, good morning. Thanks for helping us make a minyan. All right, friends. So, in case you were curious, I plotted out. I had to. I felt like that way we would make sure we end the Masechet on the exact right date. So I've plotted out all the rest of what we'll be doing in Sanhedrin. I don't think we're going to miss a week until I leave. So we'll go all the way through to the 9th or whatever it is before my barbecue. So that'll be every Wednesday from now till then, unless something changes. So get excited. There's some good stuff coming. There's Sodom and Gomorrah stuff. Well, really just Sodom. They don't really care about Gomorrah. Gomorrah. And then Noah. We're going to learn some stuff about the Ark one of the days. That's going to be great. And next week is King David. And did he sin? And is it a big problem? It's going to be great. Today, I called various incidents because there's just a bunch of random stuff. They kind of stick together. There are reasons why it's there. But also, what's really interesting, if you've been with us since the beginning, or even if you haven't, we started in a very halachic place. There are always stories and halacha. I would say stories are agadah. Let's call it that. That's what the tradition calls it. Agadot are legends or stories, usually about the sages or various people at that time. So we started in a place with both things, but a lot more halacha. We were talking about how to set up a law court, etc. But as you've noticed, or maybe haven't noticed, but I'll point it out in case you haven't, or even if you have, the last 15 dapim, the last 15 double-sided pages have really been very agadic focused, very homiletical, very moral-based, very story-based, very Bible-based, especially the last few, because they're talking about the kings of Israel, and they're talking about, various characters in the Bible, etc. Is this always characteristic of every section of the Talmud? Absolutely not, right? Totally depends on where they are and what they're talking about. But it's one of the things that makes Sanhedrin very interesting and accessible in ways that some of the other Masechtot, if you go study various parts of the Talmud on your own, what you'll find is that it's a mishmash of probably, unless you like everything, it'll be things you do like and things you don't like. And it just depends in different ratios. So I like both parts, although when it gets very, very halachic, I usually have trouble focusing. Whereas when it gets very story-based, that piques my interest. So this kind of stuff is great. If you're really into the stuff that we're reading here, I've skipped a number of things because, as you know, the Talmud is much more extensive and much larger than we have time to hit every single moment. Even if you do Daf Yomi and read every single page every single day, there's no way you're going to get every detail, every commentator. You won't have a life, right? So maybe something to do when you're retired, but until then, it's very challenging. And even if you are retired, it's just challenging. So in any case, what I'm suggesting is this is not the end. Even when we hit the end, you're always welcome to go back and look again. So look at all the stuff that I skipped. So look at the commentaries and other people's opinions. There are a million podcasts now on the Talmud from all different perspectives because now that it's accessible, people are excited. So there's men's podcasts and women's podcasts and children's podcasts and fast podcasts and deep podcasts and other language podcasts, all sorts of different things, intertextuality podcasts. So if that's your thing, if you're having a good time or you're, I want to this, that perspective, do it, right? I've just tried to give you a small taste. Then your job is to go out and learn more, right? This is just the beginning of a love affair with Talmud. You and Talmud, right? You don't know it yet, but you're going to be in love with Talmud too. Anyhow, so that's my pitch. Let's move on to 104a. Like I said, it's various incidents. We're going to start in the place of the kings. Last time we ended, actually, in the place of the kings who don't get olam haba. They don't get the world to come. That's actually what the Mishnah talks about. It says, who doesn't get the world to come? Because we're talking about law courts. Law courts make judgments. One of the judgments they make are the death penalty. When you give somebody the death penalty, maybe they also don't deserve to get heaven, or whatever you want to call it, afterlife. Afterlife is good in Judaism usually, so whatever you want to call it. You don't have to call it heaven. They call it the world to come. That just means the world that comes after this world. What do we call this world? They call it olam hazeh, which literally means this world. So olam haba, the next world, the world to come. But in any case, you don't want to not get. You do want to get the world to come. So here we had the list of kings who don't get the world to come, but we don't get Jehoiakim listed there, even though he's a bad king, right? There are lots of bad Israel kings in the past. It's just the way it goes. The tradition decides they're bad. I'm not saying they're bad. They're like 3 good kings, right? Josiah, Hezekiah, I don't know. But these guys are bad. But Jehoiakim's not so bad, it seems, that he's not going to get the world to come. So the Gemara is questioning that. What? So what reason did the Tanaim, the writers of the Mishnah, or not the writers, the purveyors of the Mishnah, why didn't they enumerate Jehoiakim among the kings with no share in the world to come, right? So they know. They say Jehoiakim's a bad king. He shouldn't get the world to come. We're making kings who don't get the world to come. He shouldn't get the world to come. Why does he get the world to come, right? So we know his extreme wickedness is described extensively in the Bible. You don't even need the rabbinic literature to know how wicked he is. Is he really so wicked? What he does, I think, is he allies with, it's weird, they're fighting Pharaoh Necho in the Bible, and then they ally with the Babylonians at one point to fight the Egyptians. But then they switch and they ally with the Egyptians to fight the Babylonians. That's a mistake, because the Babylonians win, and then they take it out on the Jewish people. Tradition also says Jehoiakim gave up Daniel. You know the book of Daniel? He was one of the captives that he gave up to the Babylonians. So that was shame on him, right? But anyways, so Jehoiakim, why isn't he listed in the bad kings? He's so bad. Well, here's why. It's due to something that Rabbi Chia, the son of Rabbi Avuya, said. As Rabbi Chia, son of Rabbi Avuya, said, it was written on the skull of Jehoiakim, right? His skull had writing on it. That's weird. It said, this and yet another. Would you like more? Yes, this and yet another, right? So what does that mean, this and yet another? You're going to get beat up not once, but 2 times, right? God's going to pound you. So that doesn't give a good reason why he wouldn't have a lack of the next world, right? Unless it means this world and the next world. But that's not how they're interpreting it, okay? So the Gemara relates that Rabbi Pereda's grandfather, Rabbi Pereda, the most patient of rabbis, look at Eruvin 54 if you want to know why. Rabbi Pereda's grandfather was apparently Rabbi Chia, son of Rabbi Avuya, and he found a skull. He's hanging out near Jerusalem. He found a skull that was near the gates of Jerusalem, just thrown to the side. And on the skull it was written, this and yet another. So he finds this skull that it says this and yet another written on it. So he's a good Jewish person, and he says, I'm going to bury that skull. That's how we take care of the dead. So he buries the skull, but then it comes out of the ground again. He's like, oh, this is annoying. So he buries the skull again, and it comes out of the ground. So he keeps doing this, and the skull keeps popping up, right? So he says, oh, you know what this is? This must be the skull of Jehoiakim, right? This must be that king's skull. How do I know that? It's written in Jeremiah, he should be buried with the burial of a donkey, drawn and cast forth beyond the gates of Jerusalem. So here's a skull. I'm burying it near the gates of Jerusalem. It keeps popping up. It's drawn and cast forth, right? It keeps uprooting itself from the ground. And this is talking about Jehoiakim. Like when he dies, that's how he's going to be buried. He's just going to keep popping out of the ground. And here's this skull that keeps popping out of the ground that says this and yet another. It must be Jehoiakim. So Rabbi Pereda's grandfather said, well, look, he's a Jewish king. It's not good to be rude to anybody, but especially not to a past Jewish king, right? We need to treat it with respect. So he takes the skull and he puts it in silk and he puts it in a box because it won't go in the ground. So this is the next best thing. So he puts it in a box and he puts it in silk. So it's like, like a relic almost. He's not using it like a relic. He just can't get it in the ground. So he's doing the next best thing. He's taking care of it. Well, oh boy. So his wife saw the box and got jealous. She thought, this is his first wife's skull, and he won't give her up for me, right? So, ooh, boy, the portrayal of women sometimes in the Talmud is just rough. Probably very inaccurate. But anyways, so his wife says, right, oi, he's carrying around this skull in silk. It must be his first wife's skull. He just can't get over her. Shame on her, right? So what does she do? She takes the skull, she sets the fire in the oven, and she burns the skull, right? She doesn't want that piece of skull hanging around her husband. Move on, buddy. It's me or nobody, right? So this is kind of harsh and rough, but what can you do? She's jealous. So she burns the skull, and then she tells her husband, I burned your dumb skull, right? Okay. And her husband says, it was not my first wife's skull. Who was it? It was the king. And this is what it means. It's written on his skull. It says this and yet another. And what does that mean? So first, this. We tried to bury his body. It didn't take. It kept popping out of the ground. How disgraceful. He's being punished in that way. And then another. And then my wife accidentally burned his skull in the oven. Very disgraceful to the body. Now we have to do our rabbinic math in the world here and the world to come, right? So how does it work? If you're punished in this world, it atones for the next world. If you benefit in this world, you might have to pay for it with punishment in the next world. It always balances out. So in this case, initially Yehoiakim, the king, was wicked in this world. So where does he pay? He pays in the next world, right? That's what you think. But God gave him some opportunities to atone in this world by sticking his body in such a way that it had a demeaning way of not being buried and a disgraceful way of being burned up. And therefore, his dead body atoned for his sins while in this world, which means he does get the world to come. They don't take away his reward in the next world, right? So it's actually good. The fact that the rabbi found it and tried to bury it and it didn't work, the fact that his wife accidentally burned it, this is really good for the king because it means that the king actually does get Olam Haba, which is why Yehoiakim is not listed among the kings who don't get the world to come. See how they did that? That's nice. That's good. Okay, so that was that. Just put that over here. Now we skip ahead a little bit. They're talking about the Jewish people. This is an interesting statement. Rava says that Rabbi Yochanan says, every place that they go, the Jewish people go, when they're exiled, what happens? They become princes to their masters, right? They become the chief servant. They become like Joseph was in Potiphar's house due to their wisdom. The Jewish people are wise, and therefore, even when they go into exile, they become helpers to the ruling nation. The sages taught there was an incident involving two Jewish people who were taken captive on Mount Carmel, and their captor was walking behind them, right? So two Jewish people on Mount Carmel get taken as captives. The captor is walking behind them, they're walking in the front. One of the Jewish captives or slaves said to the other, the camel that is walking ahead of us is blind in one eye, and it's carrying two wineskins. One has wine, one has oil. And there are two people driving the camel. One is Jewish and one is not Jewish. And the captor said to them, you stiff-necked people, how can you know this? You can't even see what's going on in front of you. This is miles ahead of you. How can you anticipate that this is the situation? You're being so specific and detailed about something you know nothing about. You are so stiff-necked, right? And this is what the Gentile nations in the Talmud often say to the Jewish people. When they seem to have wisdom they shouldn't have, they'll say, you stiff-necked people, why do you think this? Why would you assume that, right? So, and usually what happens is they get rebuffed. After they say stiff-necked people, boom, the Talmud rebuffs them with an answer. So here it comes. The two captives said, we know that the camel is blind, right? He said the camel is blind in one eye. We know the camel is blind from the grass that is before it, because the grass that is on the side that it can see, it eats, but the grass on the side it can't see, it can't eat, right? So as they're walking down the road, one side of the grass is mowed because the camel keeps eating it, but the grass on the other side is just wild and growing, right? So the camel's just eating one side of the grass. That's how we know one of its eyes is blind. We know that it has two wineskins, one with wine and one with oil, because the wine is dripping and it goes into the ground, it gets absorbed, but the oil is dripping and it's floating on the surface of the ground, so we can see there's oil here floating, and then there's what would be wine residue over here, so we can see that. We know that there are two people driving the camel, and one is Jewish and one is Gentile, and this is just what it is. We'll just move on after. The Gentile likes to defecate in the middle of the road, right? No manners. But the Jew goes to the side of the road to defecate, right? So whatever, this is just wisdom of the time, I guess. Who knows? Anyhow, so that's what they say. That's how they know it's a Jew and a Gentile. That's how they know it's a blind camel, a half-blind camel. That's how they know that there's wine and oil. The captor pursued the camel and the drivers to find out if it's true, right? So they tell him this, and he says, I don't know if I believe you. So he goes running ahead. He catches up to them, and he finds out it's exactly like they said. Oh, look at those observant, wise Jews. They're so aware of their surroundings, right? So he came back, and he kissed them on their heads, and he brought them to their house, and he made a great feast for them, and he danced before them, and he blessed them, saying, "Blessed is God who chose the descendants of Abraham and granted of God's wisdom to them, and in every place that they go, they become princes to their lords." And he released them, and they went to their houses in peace. So he is so amazed by the wisdom, this discernible ability to really nitpick and see details and be able to derive wisdom from that he says, oh my gosh, you Jewish people are trained to really see the medakdek, the very precise details within the world. That is wonderful. Wow, you guys are great. And he lets them go free. He's so touched, right? So it's kind of a strange story. Interesting. I think it does point to, among other things, this tradition and how praiseworthy already at the time of the Talmud it's becoming to be very local at times and to get into the nitty-gritty details of the world and the universe, right? Like already at the time of the Talmud, this is a really praiseworthy thing to do. You can have your head up in the clouds and be big ideas, but they love, why is this word spelled this way? Why is there grass on this side, not that side? A really amazing person is able to sit with very, very small things and derive big ideas from the small things, right? So really interesting. And then finally, there's a little section here. They're talking about a verse in Lamentations, as it turns out, Eicha, right? So it says, she cries at night. And it says, Bachot tivke, which is a smichut, right, compound, which could mean like multiple cries, right? So two cries or more. So they say, she cries at night, two cries. Why would there be two cries at night? So why does it say two cries? Why? So Rabbi says, Rabbi Yochanan says, one is a cry over destruction of the first temple, and one is a cry over the destruction of the second temple, right? So if there are two cries, one time the Shekhinah cries, why? God cries, whoever cries, why? Because the temple is going to be destroyed, and the second temple is going to be destroyed, right? Two cries, 1, 2. But it could be something else. The term at night indicates that the crying is over matters of night, as it's written with regard to response of the Jewish people to the report of the spies after the return from the land of Canaan, right? What happens? They send spies to Canaan. Almost all the spies come back and say, oi, they're like giants, we're like grasshoppers, don't go in the land, we're gonna get smushed, don't do it, right? That's bad. God gets mad. And all the people lifted up their voice and they cried that night, right? So we know matters of night, crying. What is this alluding to? It's about when the spies came and the people cried at night, oh, we'll never get into Israel, right? They got all sad. And then, this is a really scary part, but Rabbi Yochanan says, the day that they heard the spies' report was the evening of the 9th of Av, right? So that ties it to Lamentations, which we read on Tisha B'Av, one of the saddest nights. It ties it to the destruction of the two temples, which is also Tisha B'Av, right? And now we have, that night was Tisha B'Av, basically. It was the beginning of the end in terms of destruction of Israel and things like that. The people cried, so what did God say? God said to the Jewish people, you cried an unwarranted cry. I will establish for you a reason to cry for generations, right? So God says, oh, you don't have anything to cry about. You want to cry for no reason? I'll give you something to cry about, right? Boom. So the people, actually, if you want, you can look at it as a tracing. Because the people cried for no reason with the spies, God created a reason for them to cry every single year, and tons of destruction on Tisha B'Av over and over and over. First temple, second temple, etc. Right? Pretty upsetting, but interesting how the sages are understanding this. Alternatively, this one I like. Alternatively, the term at night, what else could it mean? Cry at night. It indicates that with regard to anyone who cries at night, his voice is heard due to the silence, right? So when you cry at night, things are quiet, unless you're in Texas and there's cicadas. But otherwise, things are quiet, and then you start crying. People say, oh, I was crying. I wonder why he's crying, right? Okay. Alternatively, the term at night indicates that in the case of anyone who cries at night, the stars and the constellations cry with that person. That's interesting, right? You're crying, God's world is crying in some way. And then this one's my favorite. Alternatively, the term at night indicates in the case of anyone who cries at night, one who hears that person's voice is touched by their suffering and they cry with them, right? So when you hear your neighbor crying, you too start crying. And that's true of a case, they give the story of Rabban Gamliel. Rabban Gamliel had a neighbor, a particular woman. Her son died, very sad. She would cry over his death at night. Rabban Gamliel heard her voice, and he would cry with her until all of his eyelashes fell out. That's a lot of crying. The next day, his students noticed he'd been crying, probably because he had no eyelashes. So they removed the woman from his neighborhood so Rabban Gamliel could go to sleep, right? Which is kind of funny. The students are very practical. Sometimes you have to comfort people, and sometimes you have to get them out of a certain situation. Maybe they didn't remove the woman. Maybe they removed him from his neighborhood, but I don't know. They fill in the word woman there. They probably removed the woman, which is kind of weird. I think they would move, whatever. It doesn't matter. In any case, a really interesting sort of idea of them trying to figure out why is there a double cry? What does it mean to cry? What happens when the universe cries? And also what happens when you cry when you shouldn't cry, right? What happens when we falsely cry? Well, when you falsely cry, God finds something for you to cry about, right? So again, there's a certain justice in the world. If you're gonna do this, you're gonna get that. And that's sort of what I would say comes out through all of these things again in Sanhedrin. I feel like you can say it almost every time we teach something, because this seems to be the deep theology and methodology behind all this stuff is there's justice in the world and there's a payback system, and you'll get it. No matter what, you will get what's coming to you, good or bad. God will make sure of that. Human courts should make sure of it, but if they don't, God will make sure of it, and therefore to emulate God, we should make sure of it. That's what the rabbis are thinking. So they bring in Yehoiakim and they say, it doesn't seem fair. He doesn't get justice. He should be punished in the next world. And they say, don't worry, he was punished in this world. And then they bring in another situation and they say, when it comes to the Jewish people, like, look at them. They're able to serve people in the world in certain ways, etc. And maybe that's not so much justice-based. Maybe it's just an observation of some sort, but it is interesting. They're being subjugated by others. So it's not like during this law court establishment, they're saying to themselves, like, we're going to be in charge completely or anything. Like, they recognize how the world seems to work at their time. So it's kind of funny how they're balancing all of that. And they have their real biases. We see all their biases in all of these sections, actually, right? The way that they treat women in that one section, the way that they treat non-Jews in this section, right? They're human beings. And that's something to always remember in the Talmud, is that whether or not it's a holy document, whether or not it's written by God or written with the help of people, it's about people. And because it's about people, people make mistakes. And people sometimes suck. And we have to keep that in mind. Don't think that they're a much better generation than us. Just as we have flaws, they too have flaws, and therefore when we see something we don't like, rather than point at them and say they're horrible, or point at them and say there's no way there was a mistake there, we're making the mistake thinking that they had problems. Try to find similarities and then try to find answers. Like, how did they try to solve some of those problems? Or did they? And can we try to solve some of the problems in our world? And then finally, I would say the last section, again, there's justice in the world in some way, but they're also bringing in what they know. They also recognize that maybe this is a bit of a criticism of God. Like, God caused the suffering in the world when it came to Tisha B'Av. Yeah, the Jewish people sort of spiked it, but God is the one who fulfilled it. And maybe God's not as merciful here as the Jewish people would like, and so maybe this is a bit of a criticism. It's hard to say. The rabbis aren't going to outwardly say, God sucks, or bad on you, God. But if they don't say, good job, God, that might in itself suggest that they're not thrilled that we suffer every Tisha B'Av, right? Really, really interesting stuff. And the last thing I'll just say about it is, again, right? The more you study Talmud, the more different parts of this you can pick apart depending on what you're looking for, and you probably have totally different ideas of like, oh, I would look at this or that, and so that's great. That's how we should always study Talmud. We should always come with whoever we are, embrace the ideas in there or not embrace them, and say, here's what I connect with, here's what I don't connect with, etc. Okay, so in any case, I'd love to hear any and or all of y'all's thoughts. So if anybody would like to speak, just raise your hand. I have Phil in here also. If Phil wants to speak at some point, just let me know, Phil, and we'll have you come on up. Yeah, I think I see Dr. Ozer's hand.
Rabbi, just a question. So the way that these men, the captors, ask, they try to get on the, in a sense, on the good side of the authorities, and so the idea being that, in a sense, they know how to deal with the authorities. Would you say that is involved in, in Sanhedrin? I mean, does it have a special meaning in Sanhedrin that they were attempting to get justice for themselves, or just a random story type of thing?
I mean, I don't know that I agree with you that they're trying to get on the good side of the authorities based on this story. I don't see an indication one way or the other, right? Like, they just seem to be observing what they observe, and their captor is walking behind them, right? They're having a conversation with each other. I mean, I don't think they're trying to antagonize their captor, but I wouldn't say that they're really trying. I don't think they foresee this getting them freedom. It ends up happening that way, but I wouldn't say they planned that. Do I think that there's a reason why? I think in places like Sanhedrin, various Masechtot that involve the Gentiles more, you end up with more stories like this. So if you study Avodah Zarah, which is it's idol worship is the name of the Masechet, you have a lot of the Gentiles and the Jews interacting, and you have a lot more of these sorts of stories, where when you study something like Brachot, you have some, but a lot fewer. Or if you study something very in the Jewish milieu, like Chulin, you have very few things that come up with the non-Jews showing up. I would say that this is in here among other things because when it comes to law courts and authority and ruling, etc., it's going to come into conflict with the non-Jewish authorities, and therefore the stories you're going to have are conflicts about authority and power and who's in charge and that sort of thing. But yeah, does that answer sort of your question?
Yeah,
great. Yeah, Bob.
So I thought that the first story was just absolutely hysterical. I think you could get George Burns and Gracie Allen for that one because, she's saying, "Hey, this is the skull of his first wife," it's like the scene in the in Hamlet, the gravedigger scene, that they're and that's funny also. And then the whole idea of almost please sir have another, that's out of Animal House, so I just looked at this thing and thought that it was an extremely funny story that they're using to illustrate this point. And it's the most humorous that I've seen of the stories, at least since I've come into this group to study the thing.
Yeah, great. I agree. I think, one, it's a funny story. I think, two, we are supposed to see it as, I don't think we're supposed to take it like to heart and be like, oh, how rough or anything. I agree. I think the Talmud a number of times, a lot of times actually, like the more Talmud you read, I think the more sort of funny things there are and what's said tongue in cheek. And even the rabbis talk about starting something with humor, or et cetera. Yeah, I agree. I think that the point about Yehoiakim, they do want to know why he's not getting the world to come, or why he is getting the world to come. But then the way they illustrate it, I feel like they could have come in and given you just solid arguments. They don't do that. The story that they bring is really kind of fun and ridiculous in a really good way. Yeah, I agree. Anybody else, anything? Phil, your hand? Yeah, you can come up. Yeah, Phil's coming up. 1 second.
I think it's not only the beginning, I agree, that was funny and ironic the way it starts and the way it ends. Cried until the rabbi's eyelashes came out. So they had to go and move a woman. I hope his eyelashes grew back. I don't think they do. But good stuff, anecdotal stuff. I think if I take away anything from this, one of it is, again, our tradition of learning, knowledge, being observant of the world around us. I think that in some respects that's highlighted everywhere, being, okay, observant. Why did this happen? Or, look, this is... as the two men who were following the captors.
Great.
Good stuff.
Thanks, Phil. Yeah, and just to piggyback on that and what you said, and also what Bob said, in terms of like the material is to get across important points, and there are lots of ways to do it, but all of these sections have some humor in them, right? The idea of the defecating on the road versus the side, and the camel that's blind, right? This is ridiculous. And yet, they're learning like really serious lessons from it, but also probably having a good laugh. And then even eyelashes fell out. Like, that's ridiculous. They go from something very serious, God's going to give you something to cry about, immediately to this story of like one of our greatest rabbis was next door to this woman who'd lost her son, and it made him so sad, his eyelashes fell out, and so they kicked her out of town, right? And you're like, yeah, maybe we're supposed to take it all seriously, but look, like, I think our tradition for thousands of years, among other things, has gotten through good and bad times, and especially bad times, through humor and being able to laugh about things and finding the joy in those moments. And I think it's showcased here. And also, like, look at the stories, right? The way that, I mean, and it's one of the reasons why the Talmud is such a gift, among other things, is it just contains tons of stories, funny stories and real stories and really hard to believe stories and definitely not real stories, and all of them enrich the experience in really, really nice ways. And so, again, because I'm always pitching studying Talmud, this is one of the reasons why I would say if you can make the time, Talmud will enrich your life. There's so many different things to grab onto. One of my favorite is the stories, the funny parts, the poignant parts, etc. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, Mike.
Yeah, Rabbi. So what is your explanation for the moving the woman out of town? I mean,
I think one, it could be that it's supposed to be funny. Two, in the more serious realm, look, like when you're the head rabbi, like a Rabban Gamliel, everybody defers to you and moves the world to accommodate you. And so that might have happened, unfortunately. Three, knowing the role that they put women in, whether or not it was true, if she doesn't have a husband and whatever, and she's bothering the rabbi, they might have just kicked her out of town. Like, how much protection would she have had? Unfortunately, a lot less than we would assume, probably. So hopefully, I hope it's just a joke, right? Because that one's the best, or it's exaggeration. Unfortunately, I think, and even today, if you're important enough, people will move others out of the way to make room for you, right? And that's always a problem and definitely denies human rights. Maybe that's what's going on there. You could make a big political message about it if you want. I would rather not. I would just say, I think it's just a piece of exaggeration. I don't think his eyelashes literally fell out. The story is suspect already at that point. I would say probably, I don't know, maybe the language got flipped and really they moved him out of town. I doubt that. Again, important people don't get troubled when they're troubled. You move the people who troubled the important people. So that's what I would say. But anyhow. Yeah, Miguel.
Bernard Lonergan was one of the important philosophers of the 20th century, and he has an article in which he writes about liberation, moral liberation. And toward the end of the article, he talks about the role of satire and humor in liberating us from what he calls the humbug of daily life. You know, it sets your feet back on the ground. You realize the full humanity of the people who are being humorous. I thought I would share that.
Great, yeah. And that's a good lesson to go off of anyways. Like, none of y'all, try to break out of your I know none of y'all are humbugs, but try to break out of your humbug tendencies if you can. Oh, maybe Ira, but he looked at me all mean, so. Great, yeah. A question? Yeah, Bob?
Yeah, just follow up on Miguel and this humor thing, is that humor is a disruptive force. And, you know, like interpretation of the Torah, you bang on rocks and sparks fly, and you reorganize the words in the Torah to create a new meaning for yourself. Well, humor does that too. It creates odd juxtapositions that are funny, and then to resolve the dissonance between these juxtapositions, you have to raise your thinking to a new level. So I think that humor is an effective learning device, really, when you're looking at these texts.
Great, I love that. Yeah, so humor is, while it's funny, it's also deadly serious. I like that.
That's right.
Yeah, see? Well, thank you guys so much. It's been a pleasure. I think we'll be on for the next 4 weeks, and then we'll be done. So if you can join us for any and or all of them, we'd love it. Otherwise, we're wishing you all a nice Chodesh Tov, a good morning, and a nice start to the month. Boker Tov, good morning, everybody.